It was an ordinary morning in October of 2007. The sun was just beginning to rise over the calm waters of Galveston Bay in Texas, painting the sky in soft hues of orange and pink. For most people, it was just another day, the gentle lap of the waves against the shore, the distant calls of seagulls, and the smell of salt in the air. But for one fisherman, that peaceful morning would soon turn into a scene from a nightmare. As he steered his small boat through the bay, his eyes caught sight of something unusual. Floating near the shore, partially bobbing with the movement of the waves, was a blue plastic storage container. At first, it appeared to be just debris, a discarded box, perhaps lost in a storm or thrown into the water by someone careless. But something about it didn't feel right. Its position, the way it moved unnaturally with the tide, seemed deliberate, almost intentional. There was an uneasy stillness about it, a silence that screamed that this was no ordinary piece of trash. Curiosity got the better of the fisherman, and he brought the container closer. The lid was slightly askew, as if it had been forced open or left haphazardly. And then came the moment that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Inside, wrapped in plastic and lying motionless, was the body of a small child. The sight was shocking. The child, barely 2 years old, had been beaten, her tiny body showing the signs of unimaginable trauma. Her lifeless eyes stared up, and the peaceful morning had turned into a grim scene of horror. Officers were called immediately, and soon the bay was swarming with law enforcement. Crime scene tape fluttered in the wind, officers moved quickly to secure the area, and forensic teams began documenting the scene, carefully noting every detail of the container, the surrounding debris, and the child herself. For days, authorities struggled with a simple but heartbreaking problem: they didn't know her name. They didn't know where she had come from or who could have committed such a cruel act. For a time, she was simply Baby Grace, a name that conveyed the innocence and fragility of the little girl whose life had been stolen. Her story quickly spread beyond Galveston, capturing the attention of the nation. News outlets broadcast her image, and viewers across the country were struck by the tragedy of this nameless child. Every piece of evidence told a story, one that was chilling and deeply disturbing. The container itself, a mundane, everyday object, had become a coffin. How long had the child been in the water? Who could have done this? And most haunting of all, why? Police examined the scene meticulously. They noted marks on her tiny arms, signs of struggle, and evidence that this had not been a momentary lapse of judgment or an accident. This was intentional, calculated, and filled with cruelty. In the days following the discovery, the community of Galveston was in shock. People were afraid, saddened, and horrified. Parents held their children closer, neighbors questioned what could drive someone to commit such an act, and law enforcement felt the weight of a mystery that demanded answers. The search for Baby Grace's identity became a race against time, a desperate attempt to restore a name, a face, and a story to the little girl who had been so violently taken from the world. But the discovery of Baby Grace was just the beginning. Behind the calm waters of Galveston Bay lay secrets, lies, and a darkness that few could have imagined. The investigation would eventually reveal a shocking truth, a tale of neglect, abuse, and betrayal, stretching far beyond the shore where her body was found. And as the nation watched, the story of Baby Grace became more than just a crime report. It became a symbol of lost innocence, a haunting reminder of the vulnerability of children, and a call to uncover the horrors hidden behind closed doors. For now, all that remained was that small, fragile body in the blue plastic container, a silent witness to unspeakable acts. The world mourned Baby Grace, mourned what could have been, and began the painstaking journey to find out who she was and, ultimately, who was responsible for the tragedy that ended her short, innocent life. As the news of Baby Grace's tragic discovery spread, a wave of shock, sadness, and anger rippled across the nation. The image of the tiny, lifeless child in the blue plastic container had captured the hearts of millions. But as the public mourned, a pressing question loomed over law enforcement: who was she? Who was this little girl whose life had been so cruelly stolen, and why had no one come forward to claim her? In the immediate aftermath, police launched a massive investigation. They reached out to every missing child database, scrutinized every report of a lost toddler, and sent images of the child to media outlets across the United States. Forensics experts worked tirelessly, examining her fingerprints, dental records, and DNA, hoping to find a match. The task was monumental. Without a name, baby Grace was trapped in anonymity, and every day that passed made the urgency of identifying her even more critical. Meanwhile, the public's fascination and horror grew. News stations aired her image repeatedly, describing her as a small child, barely 2 years old, with a life stolen far too soon. Social workers, child advocates, and ordinary citizens watched the story unfold with heavy hearts. Thousands called in with tips, each one carefully logged and investigated. Some leads proved to be dead ends. Others hinted at possibilities, but nothing concrete emerged. The frustration and heartbreak were palpable. The child had a story, a family, and a life, yet she remained nameless, a ghost in the very country that should have protected her. The search took on a sense of urgency when authorities realized that time was not on their side. As forensic teams combed through the evidence, they noted that the decomposition of the body suggested she had been dead for weeks, maybe even months. Every passing day made it harder to piece together her past. Investigators feared that without identification, the little girl's story, the events that led to her death, might never be told. In a twist of fate, the breakthrough came not from forensic labs, but from the eyes of the public. In Ohio, a woman was watching the evening news when she saw the composite sketch of baby Grace. There was something hauntingly familiar about the child's face, something that stirred a deep sense of fear and recognition. Could this be her granddaughter? Could this be Riley Ann Sawyers, the child who had gone missing weeks earlier? Her heart pounded as she picked up the phone to contact authorities. This tip set off a chain reaction that would finally give baby Grace a name. DNA tests were conducted, confirming what the woman feared: baby Grace was indeed Riley Ann Sawyers. The realization shocked the nation. A little girl, whose image had been circulated widely, had finally been identified, and with her name came the horrifying knowledge of her life, the abuse, the neglect, and the cruel events that led to her untimely death. The nationwide search for baby Grace was a testament to both the dedication of law enforcement and the power of the public in solving crimes. It highlighted the desperate need for vigilance in protecting children and exposed how easily innocence could be stolen in silence. Each tip, each call, and each lead brought authorities closer to the truth, a truth that would eventually shake the nation to its core. And yet, even as her identity was revealed, the questions lingered: how had this tragedy been allowed to happen? Who had failed her, and why? The story of baby Grace, once a nameless child floating in a container on Galveston Bay, had evolved into a chilling case study of abuse, secrecy, and the dark side of humanity. The search for her identity was over, but the investigation into the forces that ended her life had only just begun. After weeks of uncertainty, baby Grace, the nameless child whose story had captivated a nation, finally had an identity. The revelation came through a tip from Ohio, where a woman watching the news felt a chilling sense of recognition. The composite sketch of the little girl floating in Galveston Bay had struck a nerve. It resembled her missing granddaughter, Riley Ann Sawyers. That moment of recognition would set in motion the next chapter of a story more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. Authorities acted immediately. DNA samples were collected from Riley's family and compared against the remains of baby Grace. As forensic analysts worked tirelessly in the lab, the nation waited with bated breath. Every passing hour was filled with anticipation, anxiety, and dread. The truth would soon be revealed, and with it, the innocence of a little girl lost would gain a name, a face, and a story. Then came the confirmation. Baby Grace was Riley Ann Sawyers. The joy of identification was tempered by horror. Riley was only 2 years old, a sweet child with her entire life ahead of her, yet her story had ended in unimaginable cruelty. The news sent shockwaves across the country. Media outlets broadcast her real name, and the image of Riley Ann Sawyers replaced the sketch of baby Grace. Faces in homes across America reflected disbelief, sadness, and anger. How could something so terrible happen to such a small, innocent child? But the confirmation of her identity brought with it a chilling revelation. Riley's death had not been a tragic accident, nor the result of negligence alone. The investigation quickly turned inward, focusing on those closest to her, the adults entrusted with her care. It was a horrifying realization that the very people who should have protected her were the ones who had caused her harm. As authorities dug deeper, the details began to emerge. Riley's mother, Kimberly Dawn Trenor, and her stepfather, Royce Ziegler, were implicated in the abuse that led to Riley's death. The thought was almost unimaginable. The people sworn to love and protect her had instead inflicted pain and terror. Interviews with friends, neighbors, and family painted a picture of a troubled household, but nothing could have prepared the public for the reality revealed by the FBI's confession tapes. Riley's identification marked a turning point in the investigation. No longer was she a mysterious victim adrift in anonymity. She was Riley Ann Sawyers, a real child with a family, a life, and a story. Her name carried weight. It demanded answers and justice. Law enforcement now had the critical piece of the puzzle, a clear link between the victim and those responsible. The nation watched as investigators moved swiftly, piecing together the grim details that would ultimately expose a case of child abuse so severe it would shake communities and leave a permanent mark on the collective conscience. This shocking identification also ignited public outrage. People struggled to comprehend how such a tragedy could happen in their midst. Parents clutched their own children a little tighter, and social services came under scrutiny for missing warning signs. Riley Ann Sawyers was no longer just a story on the news. She was a real child, real family, and real tragedy, a chilling reminder of the vulnerability of children and the hidden darkness that can exist behind closed doors. And yet, despite the horror, her identification was a necessary step. It was the key that would unlock the next chapter of the investigation, the FBI confession, the unraveling of her mother's and stepfather's dark secrets, and the pursuit of justice for a child whose life had been stolen far too soon. Riley Ann Sawyers had a name, but the world was about to discover the full, horrifying truth behind the little girl once known only as Baby Grace. Once Riley Ann Sawyers was identified, the investigation took a darker, more horrifying turn. The authorities now knew who the victim was, but the question that haunted the nation was far more chilling: who could have committed such a crime, and why? The FBI and local law enforcement turned their focus squarely on the people closest to her, the very adults entrusted with her care. The scrutiny quickly fell on Riley's mother, Kimberly Dawn Trenor, and her stepfather, Royce Ziegler. Friends, neighbors, and relatives described a home filled with tension and fear, but the details of Riley's final days were far worse than anyone could have imagined. Investigators suspected abuse, but the full extent of the horror would only come to light during interrogations that would shock even seasoned law enforcement officials. Under careful questioning by the FBI, Kimberly Trenor began to crack. At first, her words were hesitant, filled with denial and attempts to downplay events. But the detectives persisted, carefully guiding the conversation toward the truth. Slowly, horrifying details emerged. Riley had been subjected to severe and repeated abuse, beaten with a belt, slammed onto a tile floor, and forced into a world of pain no child should ever endure. The confessions revealed that punishment had escalated over time, growing more violent, more cruel, until it ultimately claimed her life. The recordings of Trenor's confession were chilling. Her voice, at times trembling, at times cold and detached, painted a picture of a household consumed by anger and control. The FBI learned that on the day of her death, Riley had been disciplined for minor misbehavior, a normal occurrence in any household, yet what unfolded was anything but normal. Each strike, each act of cruelty, had been meticulously calculated, demonstrating a horrifying level of callousness and indifference to the child's suffering. Equally disturbing was the role of Royce Ziegler, her stepfather. Investigators discovered that he had been complicit, actively participating in the abuse and, in some cases, facilitating the environment that led to Riley's death. The couple's actions were not impulsive, they were deliberate, systematic, and horrifyingly cruel. The FBI's confession tapes captured it all: the fear, the denial, the twisted justification, and in every word lay the undeniable truth. This was a case of intentional, fatal abuse. The brutality of Riley's final moments became a central focus of the investigation. Experts reconstructed the timeline, piecing together the horrific sequence that ended in her death. The blue plastic container, once floating innocently in Galveston Bay, was revealed to be a grim attempt to hide the crime. Every action, every decision made by Trenor and Ziegler, pointed to one tragic fact: Riley's life had been stolen by the very people who were supposed to protect her. As the FBI confession tapes were reviewed, public outrage grew. The story of Riley and Sawyers went beyond a local crime; it became a national tragedy, a reminder of the dangers of hidden domestic abuse, and the vital importance of vigilance when it comes to protecting children. The confession was not just an admission of guilt, it was the unveiling of a horrifying reality that many had suspected but few were prepared to confront. Riley's death, once a mystery in a blue container, now had a face, a name, and a cause: deliberate cruelty by her mother and stepfather. The nation mourned, the investigation pressed forward, and the legal system prepared to hold the perpetrators accountable. Yet, even amidst the shock and grief, one undeniable truth emerged: the FBI's confession had pulled back the curtain on a darkness that few could comprehend, ensuring that Riley and Sawyers would never be forgotten, and that justice, though long delayed, would be pursued relentlessly. With the shocking details of Riley and Sawyers' death laid bare by the FBI confession, the focus now shifted to the courtroom. The nation watched as the case of baby Grace, the little girl whose life had been stolen so cruelly, moved toward justice. It was a trial that would expose the darkest corners of domestic abuse and confront the terrifying reality that the people entrusted with a child's care could also be her greatest threat. The courtroom was tense the day proceedings began. Family members, advocates, and members of the public filled the seats, their faces reflecting a mix of sorrow, anger, and anticipation. Prosecutors presented the case with meticulous detail, recounting the harrowing evidence gathered by law enforcement. They described the systematic abuse Riley had endured at the hands of her mother, Kimberly Dawn Trenor, and her stepfather, Royce Ziegler: beatings, slams to the floor, and other acts of cruelty that no child should ever experience. The forensic evidence, combined with the chilling FBI confession, painted an unflinching portrait of violence and neglect. The trial also became a moment of reflection for society at large. Media coverage highlighted the warning signs that had gone unnoticed, prompting discussions about child protection laws, reporting abuse, and the responsibilities of parents and caregivers. Riley's story became more than a case; it became a lesson, a tragic example of what can happen when the most vulnerable are left unprotected. Yet, even as justice was served, the grief remained. The life of Riley and Sawyers, a child full of potential, had been cut tragically short. Her name, once unknown as Baby Grace, now carried weight, memory, and a solemn reminder of the dangers that can lurk behind closed doors. The trial and sentencing ensured that those responsible were held accountable, but the sorrow for Riley and the haunting images of her final moments would linger in the hearts of all who followed her story. The courtroom proceedings were not just a legal resolution, they were a national reckoning, a public acknowledgement that the little girl in the blue plastic container deserved justice, remembrance, and a voice, even in death. Riley and Sawyer's story, though heartbreaking, would continue to resonate, serving as a stark warning and a call to protect the innocent at all costs. The story of Baby Grace, now known to the world as Riley and Sawyers, did not end with her tragic death or the sentencing of her killers. Even in death, her life has left an indelible mark, a legacy that continues to resonate with parents, lawmakers, and child advocates across the nation. Riley's story became more than a single case; it became a symbol, a cautionary tale, and a call to action. In the wake of her death, communities began to reflect on the warning signs that had gone unnoticed. How could such cruelty occur behind closed doors without intervention? Social workers, educators, and neighbors began asking difficult questions, realizing that the safety of children often depends on vigilance, awareness, and action. Riley's life, though tragically short, highlighted the critical need for systems that protect vulnerable children, and her story inspired discussions about improving child welfare laws, mandatory reporting, and education for caregivers. In Galveston, a community mourning her loss created a small but meaningful memorial for baby Grace. Flowers, candles, and photographs adorned the site, a place for people to remember the child who had been taken too soon. Local organizations and advocates used her story to raise awareness about child abuse, holding seminars, workshops, and campaigns to educate parents and caregivers about recognizing the signs of danger. Riley's memory became a rallying point, a beacon for those committed to protecting children from harm. Her story also resonated on a personal level for countless individuals across the country. Parents held their children a little tighter, grandparents watched over their grandchildren more vigilantly, and neighbors became more aware of the responsibilities that come with living in a community. Baby Grace became a reminder that even the most innocent lives are vulnerable and that awareness and action can mean the difference between life and death. Beyond awareness, Riley's tragic case also prompted legislative discussions. Lawmakers examined child protection policies, considering stricter oversight for at-risk children and harsher penalties for abuse. While no law could bring Riley back, her case became a reference point for improving child safety nationwide, ensuring that her life, and her suffering, would contribute to preventing similar tragedies in the future. Perhaps most importantly, baby Grace's story left a human legacy. It reminded the world that behind every statistic of child abuse is a real child with dreams, laughter, and a life worth protecting. Riley and Sawyer's brief life touched the hearts of many, and her story continues to evoke empathy, sorrow, and action. While her life ended too soon, the lessons she left behind ensure that she will never be forgotten. In remembering Riley, society is forced to confront uncomfortable truths about abuse, neglect, and the vulnerabilities of children. But it also inspires hope that through vigilance, advocacy, and love, the innocence of other children can be preserved. Baby Grace's legacy is one of remembrance, awareness, and change. She may have been gone, but the impact of her story endures, echoing in the efforts of those who fight to ensure that no child ever suffers as she did. In the end, the story of baby Grace is tragic, haunting, and deeply sobering. But it is also a story of awareness, of the power of community, and of the enduring strength of a child's memory. Riley and Sawyers may have been taken from the world too soon, but through the lessons learned from her life and death, her legacy continues to save lives, protect innocence, and serve as a reminder that even in the darkest stories, there is a call for change.